So we'll start with methods for engaging new and familiar museum audiences. My name is Marissa Ham, and I am the Region 3 Local History member in the Ohio History Service Corps. My host site is the Oberlin Heritage Center, and if you're unfamiliar with the program, so the Ohio History Service Corps has service members who spend half their time with their host site and the other half doing outreach projects. So the time that I spend with the Oberlin Heritage Center, I assist them with their projects that they like help with. So one of the main projects I'm working on is the History Forage project, where I'm managing volunteers and transcribing census data to populate historical maps. Another portion of my time with the Heritage Center is spent creating and managing their social media accounts. And so I research and write these different posts and also create these kiosk displays that you see here in the photo that we put out on Main Street that summarize what we're putting on our social media accounts. The other half of my time not spent with the Heritage Center is spent assisting outreach sites. So this can be museums and cultural centers in Region 3, which is the Northeast Ohio area. And I meet directly with these organizations, like you can see down here with the International Women's Air and Space Museum, and assist them with capacity building activities following the American Association for State and Local History STEPS program. This can be things like collections management, virtual exhibit creation, and other projects that they are interested in pursuing. I also create webinars to help educate museums and museum visitors in the Region 3 area and across Ohio, as you're seeing here today. If you are interested in connecting with the Ohio History Service Corps, you're welcome to reach out to me. My email address was on the previous slide, and I'll also show it again at the end. And I can connect you with someone in the program if you have a project in mind and would like some assistance. So jumping into the content of today's webinar, there are two main goals that I'm hoping to achieve by the end of this. So the first is that you'll learn how to effectively structure your organization's social media to better engage new and familiar audiences. And then the second one is to discover new ideas for engaging your audience through social media, tourist organizations, and newsletters. So we'll start first with social media, which will be a large portion of today's webinar. So I'd like to start with this quote, which says, "Social media platforms facilitate conversation and content sharing rather than focusing on one-way content delivery." So I think this is a great summary of why social media can be really effective for your organization. Not only is it free, but it's a way for you to communicate and have your followers participate with your organization without actually having to physically be at your organization. So if you don't already have a social media account, here's my case for you starting your own social media account for your organization. So according to a recent Pew Research Center study, 72% of adults use one or more social media sites. So there's a lot of potential to connect with people through these platforms. The main reasons that people use social media are to stay up to date with friends, family, and news, to be connected, to be entertained, and to share about their life. So these are all really important to think about when you're considering what you're posting on your social media platforms. You want to be reaching these people who are using the platforms, and you want to have your content fit within these reasons for them using social media. So the bottom line is that social media holds a lot of potential for you to connect with new audiences. So this webinar today will not be an overview of the nuts and bolts of starting a social media account and running it. And there are a lot of resources out there for that. And I will be sharing some of those resources in a follow-up email for easy access. Today's webinar will be focused more on creating a social media policy and then tips and ideas for planning and writing content for social media. So I want to start before I go into this with our first poll of today's session. Just to see how many people have a social media policy at their organization. Okay, so it looks like about 50% have a social media policy and 29% are working on one, which is great to hear. So hopefully today we'll give you some ideas for starting one, or maybe even ideas for improving your current social media policy. So the first step of a social media policy is defining what your goals are for using social media platforms. What are you hoping to accomplish? How is social media going to be an extension of your museum's mission? Is it teaching your community, connecting with them? Perhaps there's a particular demographic. Maybe you're thinking about what your audience would be on social media. And you'll usually probably think in this case, like younger people, if that's an audience you're thinking about connecting with better, social media can be a really effective tool for that. Something to keep in mind when you're setting these goals and these audience people you want to attract is that it's better to use one or two platforms really well instead of trying to stretch your resources to use multiple platforms. So Facebook is usually a great place to start because it's user-friendly, has a wide reach, and a lot of people are on that platform. And then once you've mastered that, you can start to spread out, maybe start using Instagram, Twitter, and other platforms. But you just want to keep in mind the capacity that you have in terms of volunteers and staff, because it does take a lot of time to run social media. Once you have your goals and audience set, you'll want to think about your organizational voice for your social media accounts. So this can be a little bit difficult to write down what exactly your organizational voice is. But the main idea is that when people turn to social media, they want to know that there's a human on the other side of the screen. And so really having this human voice come through, so you want to strike a balance between formal and informal, is important. And one way that organizations do this is through humor. And this can be really effective, but you want to make sure that it is authentic. You don't want it to be forced. So I've included this recent post from Ohio Local History Alliance, which I'm sure quite a few of you have seen if you're part of the organization. And so for the Ohio History Fund, they shared this photograph of the Wright brothers, and it says, "Support the Ohio History Fund. It's the right thing to do." So that's like a little bit of humor. It's pretty relevant to people who like history and would find that funny. I found it funny. It's relevant to Ohio history. And then drawing your attention to the text up above, I really like the way that this person was able to write it, and I could tell that there was a human writing this. So I'll read the first paragraph. It says, "It was recently announced that the deadline for filing state and federal taxes is extended by a month. The new filing deadline is May 17th. Yay." So to me, when I see that yay, that's the same reaction I have when I hear that there's a new tax filing deadline. It isn't too formal because they're giving us information, but they're showing, look, we're writing this and it is something that we're excited about. You should be excited about too. And it connects to an extension for contributing to the Ohio History Fund. So this is one example of having this voice that is informative, but also human. And if this is something that you're working on, is establishing this organizational voice, one of the resources I will be sharing is called the Nonprofit Social Media Decision Guide. It was just released in 2021, and it's a fantastic free resource that also includes a set of worksheets that guide you step by step through creating a social media policy. And in there is a worksheet on how to establish an organizational voice. So I definitely recommend checking that out and incorporating that into your policy. So a few final thoughts on policy and other things you'll want to consider including is really establishing who is doing what for your social media accounts. So it's really easy to delegate these responsibilities to the youngest staff member, or maybe the person who has the most experience using social media in their free time. You can do this, but you want to make sure you're giving them guidance. You don't want this person to just solely be operating your social media and not knowing what you as an organization want your social media to look like. So make sure that you have a social media policy that provides guidance to whoever is running your social media at that time. You also want to establish roles like who is responding to direct messages. So direct messages are a way for people on social media to communicate with you in real time. And if you're not responding to direct messages in a timely manner, that will reflect poorly on your organization. So having someone who is, their responsibility is responding to these is really important. It's also important because you may have someone who's new to the organization running your social media, and the types of direct messages they're receiving, they may not know the answers to those. So having someone who knows this kind of information, can respond to these messages, is really important to include. Another thing you'll want to consider is the fact that you're inevitably going to have negativity or trolls. on social media and making comments that are undesirable, potentially really harmful. And so adding this into your policy, your social media policy, how you're going to address this negativity is really important. I include this example from the Oberlin Heritage Center social media policy, which lays out who is taking care of this negativity. It'd be a staff member, and then lays out for each platform we have actionable steps that you can take to address this negativity. So for Facebook, it's hiding the comment, removing this person from likes, maybe even banning them from their page, depending on the severity of the comments or actions taken. Finally, you'll want to include in your social media policy a plan to regularly audit your social media. So this can be on the different time basis, depending on what you decide for your organization. So it could be every 6 months, it could be maybe once a year. So this is an example from Facebook Analytics. And through using this, you are able to see how well your post performed. So this is for like a 2-week period for the Oberlin Heritage Center. And through this, we can see what we posted. We can see the reach it had. So this has 893, which means that it showed up in 893 people's timelines. So they could potentially have seen this when they opened up the Facebook app today. And then over here, it shows us that 69 people decided to actually click on our post and engage with it more. And 99 people took the time to like it or maybe even comment on the post or share it. So this shows us that this post here performed pretty well. And we would make notes that what is the content of this post? Why did it perform well? So for this one in particular, it was a story that's related to Oberlin's local history, someone who's local to the area, and what she is doing now. So it also hits on that recent memory. So people in the area might still know this person. And so that's more interesting. So by auditing, we're able to figure out what do people like the most and how can we create future content that is similar to this content that has performed well. So that's a quick social media policy introduction. As I mentioned before, the resources I'll be sharing include more detailed step-by-step how to make this policy really strong. So I'll be moving next into content planning and starting first with scheduling. So for the Oberlin Heritage Center, we work on a monthly basis in planning. Our goal is to post for at least 3 times on these different platforms, Facebook and Instagram in particular. So you can see with this calendar from March, we achieved our goal of posting at least 3 times each week. So by planning monthly, we come up with a theme for that month and then research and write content that's based around that theme. So for March of 2021, we were thinking about Women's History Month. And so we did Oberlin Women in Aviation and Space History. So having this monthly plan really can guide what we're doing. It also is easy to track what we're doing by using a Google Sheet or Microsoft Excel. And this allows us to see when we're posting and making sure that we're hitting that goal of 3 times a week. So before I go any further, I'd like to start the second poll and see how many times your organization posts on social media each week. Okay, so it looks like 2 to 3 times a week is the majority of people, which is a pretty good goal. That's what we work towards as well. And you can always do more as you're figuring out what to include for that month. Okay, so this is here a snapshot of the social media schedule that we have for my service here at the Heritage Center. And you can see that by using this Google Sheets format, I'm able to include over here what date we're planning to post it. I have all the text that I'm planning to post in this cell here. I can plan out what image I'm going to share and then which platforms I'm going to actually share this content to. What's really nice about Google Sheets is that not only can I see this, but then when I'm going to post on social media, I'm able to copy and paste this text and put it onto Facebook and Instagram and have this all planned out, like I said, a month in advance. I usually spend the last week or 2 of each month researching and writing the content. And then for the first few weeks of the next month, I don't have to think about it or worry about it beyond copying and pasting and putting on Facebook, making sure it posts. One thing I will note with using Sheets is that there is no spell check in these different types of platforms. So what I've taken to doing is typing my content into a Word document, having that spell check. I also have another set of eyes and my supervisor looking over the content before I copy and paste it into this schedule that I have here. So when you're doing content planning, a few tips for consistency is aim to keep your text to 250 words or less. As history organizations, I think we're inclined to want to share more information. And so I've found that varying the lengths of your posts can be another way to hit this goal of less wordy posts. So going back to our schedule here, you can see just in the first 3 days of March of this year, the first post we had of the month was pretty wordy, but then looking at the next two posts, they're quite little in terms of text. And so having that variety can ensure that your followers aren't just assuming that every time you post, it's going to be something long that they don't want to take the time to read, but rather they're seeing a variety of lengths in terms of posts. And so then maybe they're more likely to click on that longer post because that's not what you're posting every single day of the week. It's also important to always include a photo or video, and this is particularly for Facebook. You're trying to capture people's attention. So you want to have a nice photograph or video that people will be interested in and want to click and engage with that more. So with videos as well, on Facebook, it's better to upload a video into Facebook instead of sharing a link to YouTube. Facebook, the way that their algorithms work, they just don't like links for some reason. So if you're sharing a video directly into Facebook, they're more likely to put that on people's timelines versus if you're sharing that link. Finally, you can advertise on platforms like Facebook and Instagram. It's actually pretty nominal fees, but you want to make sure you're advertising minimally. The purpose of your social media should be educational. It should be very similar to the mission of your organization. I like to think of it, if someone came to the door of the museum and I just told them, this is the event we have coming up, come to it, and then turned them away and expected them to come back in 7 days for our event, they wouldn't be as interested. They're expecting to come to the museum and to have a tour and learn. And that's similar to your social media. They're following your social media, putting that time in because they want to learn about your town's history. Or whatever your organization's mission is. And so you want to make sure that most of your content you're posting is educational. And then you can include in there advertisements for events you have coming up, or like maybe you have like a job posting or an internship for the summer. You can include that in there, but make sure it's also supplemented with a lot of interesting photos and educational content. So now the next part of content planning is ideas, which this is my favorite part. So I'm always thinking about different things that I can post on social media each month, and it can be a little bit time consuming to think of new things to post. So that's where the themes come in really well. But here are some ideas for other content, starting first with site-specific content, so stuff that's directly related to your organization. So as I mentioned, of course, you want to include your programs and events on your social media accounts. So you can see here for the Oberlin Heritage Center, we post all of our upcoming events on Facebook. And this is just thinking like people aren't going to our website every single day to check in on what we're doing, but they are probably going on social media just about every single day. And so they'll see those events there and can show their interest and try to attend those by seeing it on social media. I've been mentioning throughout this discussion of social media that local history stories are obviously really effective for us at the Oberlin Heritage Center. So for this post here in December, we shared a story about some Oberlin College students in 1960, and it performed very well. We had almost 2,000 people who saw this in their social media feeds. We had 47 people take the time to like it, 5 comments, and then 13 shares. And shares are really successful because you're potentially reaching a larger new audience of people who aren't following you, but are friends with someone who is following you. So really sharing content that is related to your organization's mission is most important. Photos of your museum are a really easy source of content. I'm assuming most of you have campuses at your organization that are quite beautiful and people would like to see them. And so you can see here for the Heritage Center, we shared this photo, actually my predecessor did, of a white squirrel on the Oberlin Heritage Center campus. And this caught people's attention. They saw this photo, they wanted to click on it, engage with it. And then you can see at the top here, we were able to incorporate a little plug for people to come to our site and see the current exhibit we had going on at that time. So it's again that idea of having an eye-catching photograph that people are going to take note of and then are more likely to engage with. Finally, for site-specific content, sharing about your staff and volunteers and behind the scenes information is something that people really like to see, especially during the pandemic, to know that your organization still has people doing things. So for this example here, our director has a yearly cleaning her desk day. And so we were able to share a before and after scene of this. And I think I like the most about this is we had 14 comments. So people were really engaging with this post, congratulating her on cleaning her desk, and just seeing that as an organization, we are active, and her desk is an example of this. So this can also be really helpful with volunteers. If you're sharing photos of what your volunteers are doing, that can give potential followers or people who see that ideas of what they could do if they decided to volunteer at your organization. So maybe they're seeing photos of volunteers gardening. They like gardening, they've been looking for somewhere to volunteer their skills. Your organization pops up in their social media platform and they think, great, I can volunteer there. So it can give ideas in that way as well. So moving beyond site-specific content, I really like this example here, which again, I learned from my predecessor. So when I start my planning for the month, I start with this website here, which is called www.nationaltoday.com. You could Google it really easily. And I look at what holidays there are throughout the month that's coming up. And these aren't holidays like major ones, like Valentine's Day or Halloween. These are more obscure ones that most people probably don't know about, but they can be really good jumping off points for content creation. So for this holiday over here, it's National Bubble Wrap Appreciation Day. I was able to work with the collections manager here to write a post about why bubble wrap isn't the best material to use for long-term preservation, and then provide examples of other materials that are safe for preservation that we use in place of bubble wrap. And this also provided a little behind the scenes of some items in the collection that aren't on display that people would see when they visit in person normally. Over here on the right, for National Hat Day, we were able to share this photograph, the series of photographs actually, of this gentleman trying on different hats. And it was a recently donated photograph. It's just really interesting. And this gave us a reason to share it online. And people really liked this. We had someone even post a photograph of her in her new hat that she just purchased. We had another person comment that she was excited to see this photograph of her relative. And so this got us some engagement. And really overall, this can be a great way to find unexpected connections to your site and your mission through these seemingly very weird holidays. Another idea, of course, is to share content. So following other organizations that are similar to your own is a really great idea, and to keep watch of what they're posting and share that kind of content. So you can see here for Toni Morrison Day, the Lorraine Historical Society shared a post about a watch party for her documentary. And so we were able to share that with our followers. It both shows that we are supportive of other organizations in our area, and it also directs our followers to potential events that they might be interested in since they're following our organization. On the right, we have a post from the Ohio Museums Association, which they were sharing content for Support Ohio Museums, and they were sharing content about the Oberlin Heritage Center. So of course we wanted to share that on our social media accounts as well to celebrate this highlight that one of the professional organizations in Ohio shared about us. Sort of similar to sharing, where you have to keep track of what other organizations are posting. If you have someone who's really on top of social media, sharing some real-time trends or participating in them can be an effective tool to engage people who might not know about your organization otherwise. So of course, what came to mind for me most recently is the Bernie Sanders meme from the inauguration. And all these people were posting and photoshopping him into different scenarios. My favorite were when they would put him in like pieces of art, like you can see here. So for this museum, this got them a lot of likes and retweets and potentially some new engagement with people who were following this social media trend and happened to come across their content, liked it, and now maybe they're more invested in following that museum. So it has potential to reach a new audience in that way. Finally, for content ideas, I couldn't end the conversation without talking about hashtags. So if you're unfamiliar with hashtags, the idea is that when you include one of these, so you can see in our post here in blue, we have hashtag museum highlight. If someone were to click on that on Facebook, it would direct them to more content that has included that hashtag in their posts. And so then in theory, people could find your content by following that hashtag. I've found hashtags to be most useful in terms of content ideas and planning. So you can see with this list that I've included of just some ideas of museum related hashtags. These can be a great way for you to start like a series of posts that give you something to post every single week. So you can see for What Is It Wednesday, you could include every single Wednesday a picture of something in your collection and have people comment and try to guess what they are seeing in that photograph that you've shared. So it's going to be a great way to jump off and have different ideas of things to post that are related to your museum. So some final thoughts on content. You'll want to establish a repository of photos and other content to pull from once you're starting your social media planning. So this can be scans from yearbooks. It can be postcards are really popular right now. Perhaps you have newspapers, or maybe you have games that are related to your town's history. So if you have that all in one place, then you can have something to pull from when you're looking for content ideas to share on social media. It's also possible to recycle content. So you can have, in theory, with social media, you're gaining more followers the longer you have your account. So perhaps you shared something 2 years ago and now you have 1,000 new followers and they didn't see that content from 2 years ago. And maybe even the people who were following you didn't see that content either, or maybe they forgot about it. So sharing it again can be an option for you if you're looking for something to post. Finally, if you're not already using Canva for nonprofits, you are welcome to, or I encourage you to use Canva. It's a free graphic design tool that is pretty intuitive and can really up the appearance of your social media content in a really simple way. So that brings us to the end of a brief discussion about social media as a tool for engaging new and familiar audiences, which brings me into our next topic, which is local tourism organizations. So I will give everyone a moment to answer our next poll, which is about your reopening plans as a museum. Okay, so does your museum plan to open this summer? 73% of you all said that yes, you do. And a couple are no and still deciding, which seems about accurate. So thinking about local tourism organizations and reopening. According to recent research from the Ohio Travel Association back in April, so of course this may have changed with recent updates to CDC guidelines, but as of April, only 37% of Americans still felt that it was unsafe to travel. This is significant compared to back in April of 2020, when 82% of Americans felt it was unsafe to travel. So the reasons that people feel that it's safer now to travel is largely because of vaccine distribution and continued vigilance in enforcing masks and other safety measures in public spaces. So as museums, there's not much we can do about vaccine distribution, but we do have it in our power to handle continued safety measures in our museums to make sure that our visitors feel safe when they come and check out our museum. So something else to consider in all of this is that road travel is still preferred by most participants in the survey. So you'll want to be thinking as you're reopening, how can we encourage those road travelers to stop at our museum and include that within their trip. So collaborating with local tourism organizations can be a really effective way to grab potentially like those road travelers and other people who are thinking of going out this summer. So starting with your collaboration, it's really just a phone call and conversation to figure out what your local tourism organization can do for you and what will be the most effective plan moving forward. So this can be as simple as advertising your organization and their materials or collaborating on social media. And with both of these, local tourism organizations have different networks. So they're not necessarily connecting with the people who are already following you, they're connecting with a whole different group of people. So there's a lot of potential for you to engage with new people through these local tourism collaborations. It's also important to know if there's a community calendar, either run through your local tourism organization or in your town. And you'll want to make sure that your upcoming events are included within this calendar so that you have, again, you're reaching potentially new people and encouraging them to visit you. And finally, if you're not already connected with your town's Main Street organization, if your town has one, that's a great way for you to, again, get your name out there and potentially connect with people in a more effective way. So if you're wondering where to start with these collaborations, one option may be the Ohio Department of Tourism. I'll be sharing a link to their website that lays out some of the guidelines of what kind of events and organizations they promote, and if you maybe qualify for that. It's likely that it'll be more effective for you to reach out to your local tourism organization, however, and have a deeper connection there. So this is just for Region 3 in Northeast Ohio, the 5 counties within this region and their tourist organizations. And really, if you're not within one of these counties, you can easily Google it and figure out which organization you can connect with. Something to point out is that with the pandemic, these organizations may be operating at a lower capacity, lower staff capacity, so you want to be patient in your connections with them. Another thing to consider is that in February of 2022, Cleveland is set to be the host for the Heartland Showcase. If you're unfamiliar with the Heartland Showcase, it is a Midwest organization that connects bus tours with places to visit. So when this convention happens in 2022, if these local tourism organizations have a booth there and they're advertising, hey, these are cool places in our county that you might want to add as a stop on your bus tour to come visit, then if you're in collaboration with this local tourism organization, they could be promoting your museum as a place for these bus tours to come and visit throughout the summer and fall. So that was a quick pitch on why you should reach out to your local tourism organization and see what potential lies there for connecting with new audiences. Which brings me to our final part of the webinar, which is newsletters. So typically we think of newsletters as people who are already subscribed and engaged with our organization, but they do hold a lot of potential to not only maintain those subscribers, but also to encourage people to be more engaged with our organization. So a newsletter, very simply, is something that contains the most interesting content, announcements, and promotions for your organization to keep your subscribers up to date. A good rule of thumb is that these publications have a balance of 90% educational and 10% promotional content. Something to think about if you don't already have a newsletter, or if you do have a newsletter and maybe you're thinking of revamping it, is how frequently you should distribute this newsletter and in what format. Usually people send this either in a physical format or email format, or sometimes both. So this brings me to our last poll, and this is about your newsletter sending and what you're doing currently as an organization. So there are actually 2 questions within this. All So we actually have a majority of organizations sending a quarterly newsletter, paper quarterly newsletter, and a majority of organizations not sending an email newsletter. Interesting. So thinking about frequency of distribution, as you saw in those polls, the most frequent ones that I've seen are monthly and quarterly, and then I've also seen yearly publications. So there are pros and cons to all three of these options. For a monthly publication, what's great about this is that you can regularly connect with your subscribers. So you can easily advertise your upcoming events, share a lot of detail about what has been happening in the past month, and advertising for what will be happening in the next month that they can participate in. Something to consider with a monthly publication, however, is that it does require a lot of staff and volunteer time to compile these every single month to share with your subscribers. So if that's a concern, then quarterly is likely a better option for your organization. So if you're sending a quarterly newsletter, which is usually about every 3 months, you'll want to supplement these with occasional email updates to keep your subscribers in touch with your organization. What's great about a quarterly publication is that you have more time to create each edition, and you can include a little bit less detail because you're covering a 3-month time period. So you want to summarize the highlights from those 3 months. You can somewhat advertise upcoming events, but it is a bit in advance. Finally, for a yearly publication model, you definitely need to have other updates with your subscribers throughout the year, preferably in email. So what's great about a yearly publication is you obviously have a lot of time to create it. And if you're thinking about sending a physical copy versus an email, if you're sending a physical copy yearly, that definitely lowers your costs of printing and postage. So if you want to send a physical copy and are limited in your budget, a yearly newsletter might be a good option for you. So now I'll jump into a few examples of these different models and also talk about email versus physical copy of these newsletters. So I'll start first, of course, with the Oberlin Heritage Center. So for OHC, we send out a newsletter on a monthly basis, and you can see here in the center, this is all one long email. Normally you'd be scrolling through, and starts off right away with an educational content, a history minute about a woman from Oberlin's history. So it's also fitting in with Women's History Month in March. And that's the first thing people see when they open the newsletter. Then moving down, you can see there's advertisement of upcoming events from the Heritage Center, advertisements for internships. Each month, something that's included in these publications is a book of the month. So people could be following your newsletters for those recommendations. And then finally, you'll see down at the bottom, there's advertisements for other events in the area that other organizations are putting on that we think our subscribers to this newsletter would be interested in. The Heritage Center distributes this via email monthly, but there is an option when people sign up for the newsletter to receive a physical copy instead, if that's what they'd prefer. So you can see the physical copy down here on the left. And only about 50 people sign up for this physical copy option, which saves us from spending the money to print and send these to people who would rather have an email version of the newsletter. So this can be a really good model if budget is something that's in your mind. We also include physical copies of the newsletter in our front office so that people who visit us may be interested, pick one up, and then eventually become a subscriber to the regular email updates. Next example is a quarterly one from the International Women's Air and Space Museum. So for the Air and Space Museum, they have both a print edition, and then that comes out quarterly, and then an email monthly newsletter update. So this is great because you can have different information between the two types of newsletters. The monthly ones can be more immediate events that are happening. And again, what's great about an email newsletter is that, especially with COVID, with most things being online, you can directly include links within that email newsletter that directs people to sign up for your events or visit your website in a way that in a print publication, if you're trying to share stuff that's happening online, people likely aren't going to type the link from your paper newsletter online to figure out what you're trying to direct them towards. So this can be really effective. They're saving on postage and printing by sending out a newsletter every 3 months instead of every month, but they're still staying in touch with their followers through these monthly emails. Something to consider, and I'm sure the women at the Air and Space Museum would be happy to speak with you about this, is what platform to use if you're interested in starting an email newsletter and don't have one. For them, they use Constant Contact, and that might be a good option for you. And I'm sure they could give you more information on that if that's something you're thinking about right now. Finally, a yearly example of a newsletter. So the Thomas Cole National Historic Site prints a yearly publication every fall, and this includes an overview of everything that's gone on for their site throughout the past year. So they have a lot of time to put this together. They can lay it out, they can make it look nice, print them all in color, since they're sending them once a year to their members. And they, of course, have to have supplemental emails to this. So you can see this is an example of one of their email updates, which come about every other week. And these give the most immediate information of what's happening at their site and encourage people to take note of that. It's not so much an overview of what they're doing as an organization. It's more just, this is what's happening in this moment right now. Visit our website and learn more. So a few final tips for newsletter creation, and this is mostly focused on email newsletters. So you might want to try out a catchy subject line when you're sending these e-newsletters. I like to include this example from the Johnny Appleseed organization that I recently received in my inbox, and it says, "Your fruit trees don't like to be lonely." For me, I read that and I thought, why am I receiving this? What is this? So I had to open it, and right away I see that it is the May newsletter, which explains what this email is about, but it still doesn't explain why my fruit trees are lonely. So that encourages me to scroll down and find out the answer and read more and really engage with their newsletter. So that can be a good way for you to get more engagement with your newsletter. Another thing with email newsletters is you want them to be easy to unsubscribe from. So people might sign up for your emails and then decide they don't want them anymore. And if there's no way for them to easily find an unsubscribe button at the bottom of the email, they may become frustrated and resent your organization because you're keeping them trapped in your email chain and they don't want to be. So as much as you may want them to stay, something to consider is making it easy for them to leave as well. As with the print copy, where you're proofreading multiple times before you print, you'll both want to proofread your emails and then do a test send before you send it to your subscribers. This can be as simple as sending it to yourself or someone in your organization to make sure that the links are working and everything looks right. Finally, something just to think about with newsletters is whether or not it is something that you would want to read, is engaging, and what would make you click on it if it popped up in your inbox. So this leads me to the end of the webinar and a brief activity that you're welcome to participate in, asking about your favorite non-museum newsletter. So if you can think of a newsletter that you receive, either a physical copy or an email, what about that newsletter? What's a feature that makes you open it and want to read and learn more? So you're welcome to comment on this in the chat box, or you can unmute and share with the group if you would rather do that. So I'll give you a moment to think about that, and I'll actually share something that came to mind for me for a non-museum newsletter, which is from Goodreads. So this is actually an example from 2014. So the newsletter has changed quite a bit since then, but this popped into my mind as a reason why I opened these emails every month. And I like to see these illustrations they had with a quote. I thought those were really interesting, and I would scroll to the bottom of each email to see what those were. I also liked that they included these little quizzes. They would catch my attention. I'd end up clicking on the answer and it would direct me to their website, and I'd end up doing the whole entire questionnaire. So that's just something that I looked forward to in these newsletters. I also thought it was interesting. I found in one of their newsletters, they included a poll just asking their subscribers, what don't you like about this newsletter? And I like to think that this kind of informed what their current newsletter looks like, which you can see here on the right, and what they include in that now based on the poll that they sent out a few years ago.
So somebody shared that they like seeing like old photos. So maybe that's a way to highlight items in the collection, kind of like you were talking about with social media with the bubble wrap post, but maybe they can highlight some things in their newsletter too that typical museum visitors do not get to engage with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great one. I like visuals. I think are just always effective no matter what platform you're using.
Somebody else said that they particularly like the Atlas Obscura newsletter. They think that that's a nice newsletter. So maybe another one to check out.
While people are taking some more time to think about this, I'll answer one question that I received from Angela asking, is the newsletter going out to paid membership and like people who are paying their dues? And in most cases, it is people who have subscribed to the newsletter, particularly for emails. You don't have to be a paying member to be updated about our organization, but hopefully those people are members and are both interested in being a member and subscribing to our newsletter.
Well, I'm not seeing anything else come in, so I think we can move on.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for attending today. I hope that you got at least one new idea out of this webinar and can apply that to your social media, newsletters, or local tourism organizations. So please let me know if you have any questions at this time. You can, of course, pop them into the chat, unmute yourself, ask them there, or if you'd rather send me a follow-up email, I'd be happy to have further discussion with you.